He co-authored the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as Canada's Constitution Act of 1982. On February 1st, 2022, his legal team filed 11 affidavits in a federal court lawsuit to strike down the federal government's mandatory vaccine requirements for air travelers. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Mr. Brian Peckford.
My mother came from Scotland. My mother's people came from Scotland. And so it's a little bit appropriate to have that kind of introduction. What a wonderful group of speakers we've had. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to speak again on the steps of this legislative building today, and to thank you all for coming. Some of you came from near, some of you came from far. I was lucky to have an email from a gentleman in Surrey a few days ago, and he asked me where I was going to be speaking next, and I told him I was going to be speaking here. He turns up with his Charter of Rights and Freedoms to get it signed today, so I know this gentleman came from Surrey. It was a lady from around here, an elderly lady who emailed me this week as well, and another lady from Nanaimo who emailed me, and I told them I was going to be here, and I never got up here 3 minutes before the two of them turned up. And behind me, as you notice, there are a number of flags, and they're all very important flags. But there was one province of Canada that never had its own flag until the 1980s. And one of the things I had promised when I was running for the leadership to be Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador was that if I was lucky enough to get elected, that I would introduce our own flag for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. There it is. Where is it? There it is. And you have to understand, as other speakers have said, that symbols are very important. I've often been asked, what do you consider to be some of your most important contributions to Newfoundland and Labrador in particular? And I always have trouble. I always have trouble between the Atlantic Accord, which brought billions of dollars to the province that they otherwise wouldn't have, and other material kinds of improvements. But you know something? That flag will be around long after all those perhaps other improvements mean that much. Symbols are important. That's why the people who are flying the Canadian flag today and flying other flags are so important, because they're permanent. Something like the Constitution was supposed to be. Something like the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was supposed to be. Until other people took it upon themselves to usurp even the most sacred and supreme of our laws, the Constitution of our country. That's why we are here today, to tell these people they're not going to get away with it. Never forget, we stand on the shoulders of a Solon in Greece. We stand on the shoulders of a Socrates in Greece. We stand on the shoulders of a Pericles in Greece, 390 BC. We stand on the shoulders of Cicero in Rome, just before Jesus, who defended, by the way, this guy Cicero, so long ago, he defended the people of Sicily in the Senate of Rome, where a governor had taken all of their freedoms and rights away and all of their money. He took on the case and he won it. We are taking on the case and we are going to win it. Don't forget the Gandhis of this world. Don't forget Mandelas of this world. Don't forget the Martin Luther Kings of this world. They all were standing on all their shoulders to stand for something that suddenly the majority and the narrative has dispelled with, has eliminated from our lives. It's okay. I'm okay. I'm okay. So I want you to remember that we're part of history, and Canadian history as well. Anybody who knows their Canadian history knows that even before Confederation, even before 1867, there were wonderful people in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, in Upper Canada and in Lower Canada, who were fighting for parliaments to have their own assemblies, and they did. Before 1867, before our first Constitution Act, there were Canadians, there were people in this nation who were fighting for their own assembly, for their own parliament, and they succeeded. For example, the one in Newfoundland started in 1832. Canada became a country in 1867. So we're standing on the shoulders of a lot of other people, even before Confederation, who were fighting for their own parliament in their own jurisdictions, in their own colonies, as they were called at the time. And then, of course, we got Canada in 1867. But we must acknowledge all of these people who were fighting at that time in even more difficult odds than we're fighting in, and who fought and very often won very wonderful causes. Okay. Now, we can, and I have for a long time talked about all the things that have happened and all of the leaders who have let us down. And I want to not only criticize today, I want to offer solutions. Okay? I just don't want her, I want to offer solutions. And I want you to listen to me. I know you're going to listen to me closely anyway. I want you to listen to me even more closely today. This is a proposal to reclaim Canada. This is a proposal that I call, as Doctor before me just said, the Magna Carta of today. And here's what we, the Canadians, citizens of Canada, gathered here today. I hope you will vote by your applause later to support the following. Okay? Number one, an independent public national inquiry to examine whether government, federal, provincial, and territorial mandates and lockdowns were necessary and constitutional. People in government and their agencies who are found guilty of breaking the law after due process must be brought to justice. Such an inquiry cannot be led by the governments of Canada, who are the major subjects of the inquiry. Instead, a citizens group must be formed for that purpose. And these governments and their agencies must open their books and release to the inquiry and to all the public all the necessary relevant information concerning their actions during the pandemic. We talk accountability. This is accountability. Number two, this is a tough one to swallow, as a lot of the other ones I mentioned are going to be tough to swallow. All registered political parties in Canada federal, provincial, territorial, must be obligated by law to publish audited financial statements annually. Do you know, some of you who follow me real closely know, do you know that right now none of the federal political parties who are in the House of Commons publish any audited financial statements? Why should we entrust them with our money, billions and billions each year in government taxation, if they won't show us their books for their own parties? That's puzzling, isn't it? When I published my leadership campaign expenses, audited financial statements, when I ran for the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party of Newfoundland, there was silence. No other leadership candidate at the time did it, and I don't know how many leadership candidates across the country has ever did it since, provincially or federally. Audited financial statements when I took over the leadership of the province. I made sure that the first part was covered too. That's pretty basic, isn't it? Isn't that basic? Isn't that basic? Shouldn't all the political parties that you're going to be examining for the next federal election, shouldn't you know how they spend their money?
Yes! Yeah.
Okay. Stay with me. Stay with me. No member of Parliament, number 3. No member of Parliament or members of provincial legislatures or territorial assemblies can sit in these chambers if they have broken a Canadian law as determined by a court or an ethics or conflict interest commissioner. Why should we have lawbreakers be lawmakers? The Prime Minister of Canada today sits in the Parliament and he's broken the law 5 times. Doesn't that sound reasonable? Yes. That anybody who breaks the law can't sit in our parliaments to make laws? Yes. Number 4, every private member's bill or resolution presented before Parliament in Canada must be debated and voted upon within 6 months of the parliamentary sitting. You go and ask an MP after this thing is over, your MP, ask him if he put a private member's resolution on the table tomorrow in the federal parliament, when would it be heard? 3 years. 4 years. Depending on how long before the next election, and then the election gets in the way, a new parliament is formed, he's got to reintroduce it again. Every MP who's elected by you in your constituency, you should have the assurance to know that your MP that just was elected to go to your federal parliament, if he wants to enter a resolution on your behalf or behalf of the citizens of that constituency, should be debated in that parliament in a reasonable period of time.
Yes.
Otherwise, what's the point of having an MP?
Politicians should have to work.
How about this one? Going to get in a lot of trouble on this one. All judges of the Supreme Court of the provinces and of the courts of appeal, the federal courts and the Supreme Court of Canada must, by law, have criteria established as to their qualifications to serve. Not something that was passed by one department, but a special law of the Parliament of what qualifications you must have to even apply to be a judge. And all government-nominated candidates for those positions must be subject to a hearing by a parliamentary committee who would present to full Parliament their recommendations to approve or reject any nominated judge. Parliament's decision is final. One time, 10 years ago, I would never say this. I would respect our traditions, that we could really trust our traditions, that things would be done properly. But we know now, we have it proven to us in spades that we cannot trust that system which does not come through Parliament, but which is done by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Justice, and with the Judicial Council and other people who are going to recommend, and then they get nominated, not only nominated, they get approved to be the judges of this country. We now know that the people must be more involved of who controls the law of this country. Who interprets the law of this country. If in fact, as all the political philosophers say, the final thing rests with the people, then it should happen for this too.
Absolutely, 100%.
Thank you. How about this one? And you'll remember this one from a few years ago. All parliamentary committees of all Canadian parliaments must have safeguards whereby the majority of the committee cannot close down those committees when the business of the committee has not been completed. Just across the strait here, we have Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was the Minister of Justice, and who was summarily, right, attacked by her own government to change her department's mind on a regular course of business dealing with a very large corporation in this country. And after all of that was over, and she didn't buckle, right, then she went to a parliamentary committee to tell her story. And what happened when she went to a parliamentary committee to tell her story? The committee suddenly closed down, even though she had more to say. How could that happen in a democracy? How could that happen? Tyranny of the majority. This is what Thomas Jefferson and James Madison talked about when they were putting together the American Constitution. They were talking about ways to ensure that the majority didn't step on the minority, that rights and freedoms were not part of being a majority. You had to defend those rights and freedoms. So we must ensure in the future, this is part of the Magna Carta, this is part of our new Magna Carta, we must ensure in the future that parliamentary committees in the territories, in the provinces, and in the federal parliament are not closed down when there's a legitimate witnesses available to tell more testimony about the subject of that parliamentary committee. And this was a former Minister of Justice. This was an MP of the Parliament being shut down from telling her story by whom? By Parliament. You know that is wrong. And this cannot be, and if these things are not changed, these are the fundamentals of our system. Okay? If these things are not changed, if we don't have honest political parties to start with, how can we have honest governments later? One follows the other. How about this one? How about this one? Here's another of our new Magna Carta for Canada. All governments of Canada must have balanced budgets legislation enacted, with no exceptions except in time of war or insurrection or the country's existence is at stake. And the government would have to prove that in order not to have a balanced budget. Would have to prove that. So balanced budgets, we're not going to allow our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren to pay off our silly, foolish, undisciplined ways. And fathers and mothers and uncles and aunts and grandfathers and grandmothers, all authorities responsible for primary, elementary, and high school education must enact curriculum measures to ensure civics is a mandatory subject in each grade after grade 8. You ask a kid on the street here today, even perhaps a graduate of university, find Prince George on the map, and they mightn't be able to tell it. Right? They wouldn't be able to tell it. And by the way, I had personal experience of that happening to me with a master's, person who had a master's of arts from a Canadian university, who worked for me in Vancouver after I moved out to British Columbia. I had to take these people off the phones with the company I worked for because somebody would be calling in from Prince George or Sycamoose or Vernon, right? Or Vanderhoof, right? Or wherever, mainly in British Columbia. And these people didn't know where they were coming from. Wow. They had a master's degree. And you all know yourselves, I don't have to explain this to you. One of our big problems today is because we don't even understand our own Constitution. And why don't we understand our Constitution? Because we don't have any basic understanding of it, because it wasn't mandatory in our schools, it wasn't mandatory in our universities, and we became quite uninformed about who we are, how we get there, and how we are governed. This is mandatory from my point of view. Don't worry, sir, I'm coming to your point. Don't worry. How about this one? The power of the Prime Minister must be reduced. Do you know how many people work for the Prime Minister today? No, not the departments, not the Parliament. How many work in his office? The Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office, which are both really the same thing. How many work? Over 1,500. 1,500, and he has, besides that, 7,000 deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers in all the departments and agencies of government.
Lock them all up!
That number must be reduced to not more than 500. Now listen to this. And I just looked this up the other day, and I even got a shock because I was using a lower number. There are more than 206 departments and agencies of the federal government. There's 206 departments and agencies of the federal government, and they employ 320,000 Canadians. So let those departments and those public servants do the work of the Prime Minister's office, because that's what they were elected to do in the first place. That's what they were hired to do in the first place. Let the deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers do their job, not have it come out of the Prime Minister's office. The power of the Prime Minister and the premiers has become too powerful. We now have an executive government, not a parliamentary government.
Yes. They're all puppets.
We have an executive government without a shot being fired. The Prime Minister of Canada was acting like he was President of the United States, rather than as the Prime Minister of Canada.
Moving down.
We write it down.
Next one. There must be a 3-day public First Ministers' Conference annually by all the premiers and leaders of the territories and the Prime Minister. This must be mandatory to discuss the pressing national issues of the day. All governments must publicly issue written statements at the conference highlighting what they think are the national priorities. Not do a spin at a press conference, not do a press release. Force all of the First Ministers of this nation to get together once a year and to issue a public statement at that conference of what they think is important for Canada.
Let's have a debate.
You like this one? Canadian courts hearing a constitutional case related to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms must be obligated to consider in their written rulings the two introductory concepts of the Charter, the supremacy of God and the rule of law. No decision rendered without a written consideration in the decision of these principles will be valid.
Yes!
Right now we have courts in our land that have already ruled on charter provisions without even discussing the two concepts of supremacy of God and the rule of law, both of which are in the charter. We had a constitutional expert here 2 speakers ago, Dr. Lugosi. He referenced this in his speech just a few minutes ago. It's just not me talking this. It's people who studied the Constitution at length and come to the same conclusion that I come to, one of the people that happened to create it and write it, you know. Two more. This is not exhaustive, but if we could get these done, then we could move on to a few more that need to be done.
Yes.
But here are two more. And these are very, very current. Canada, this is another declaration of our new Magna Carta, Canada must remain a sovereign nation. Therefore, no treaty or international regulations of any kind can be agreed to by Canada that in any way erode our sovereignty. We are either sovereign or we're not. You can't be half sovereign, nor can you be half pregnant. You can't be half sovereign.
Yeah, they do it.
Whatever you think of Trump, just put it one side. Whether he did it by accident, whether he did it, however he did it, when he got out of that Trans-Pacific Treaty thing, and when he got out of the World Health Organization, he was right. He was right. And over the years, many times I have, through my active political career and afterwards, I have acknowledged if somebody, even I was opposed to politically, but if he or she said something that was sensible and reasonable and made sense.
Yes.
You've got to acknowledge it, if in fact it's true. As Dr. Lugosi would say, it comes down to truth. It comes down to the golden rule. Right? And if we are to be a sovereign nation and have control, one of the reasons why, I think I might have said it here on the stage before, one of the reasons why Britain finally said no to going into the European Union, becoming just one political group like the rest, was because the farmer got a letter in the mail in the Midlands of England before the vote, which said, next year, Brussels is going to tell you how many bushels of wheat you can grow. We would be no longer sovereign. That's when the rural Britons rose up and helped defeat England going in the European Union. If you don't want somebody else deciding your bushels of wheat, then we will reject what the government of Canada and now the government of the United States and other countries are trying to do by amending these international regulations, health regulations, to give control over what they think is an emergency, has to be an emergency in Canada. We cannot accept that. We are sovereign. We'll decide. And lastly, membership in any international organization must be conditional upon Canada remaining a completely sovereign nation. So to those who say that we are only here to attack, let them listen to what I just said. Let them read what we just completed. Because this shows you we have alternatives that are natural. As the doctors and the medicine people said about the vaccines, the same thing. There are alternatives. All of these alternatives we just mentioned, we can put into practice tomorrow if we had a majority of Canadians on our side. They would not be able to go against it. If we had a majority of Canadians on our side, we can make change. But the first thing we have to do, and it hurts me to say it, the first thing we have to do is we have to change our own political parties to be honest and forthright. If we don't, then the rest doesn't change, because they've gotten away with not being honest, and they know how they can get away then with being not honest when they form the government. We must do that. We must do that. Whether your mother or your father or your grandfather was Liberal, Conservative, NDP or Green or whatever, we've got to come to the understanding now after these past 2 years. If we've learned anything, We've learned that we must fundamentally change the way we operate as Canadians if we are to make meaningful change, and these kinds of oppressive measures don't happen again. A gentleman came up to me over here 5 minutes before I was due to speak, and he said, "Brian, when you get up to speak, I'm counting on you to do something for me." I said, "Okay, sir, what's that?" He said, "Please acknowledge and get the people here to acknowledge the hurt and the suffering that's happening right now amongst families, small businesses and others who've been hurt either because of the mandates and the draconian measures that have been put in, where there was delayed surgeries, delayed specialist appointments, or people who've been hurt because of the vaccine. There are a lot of people hurting, and we must acknowledge that. Not only ways to rectify, we must acknowledge that even out here amongst the people that are here today, you have either relatives or friends who have been hurt by what has happened in the last 2 years. We must acknowledge that they're in pain. We have it in our own family. We have it in our own extended family, Carol and I. All the way to death. And the children. And so we must, in exclaiming freedom and explaining all those shoulders that we're standing on, right back to Socrates, we have to acknowledge right here, right now, this moment, all those people, including children, who are hurting because of what happened in the last 2 years. And we must make these changes so this does not happen ever again.
Never again!
Last one. No. I'll end with this, if I can get my hands on it. And this sort of sums up what other people have said. This was said by David Bell on the website Brownstone Institute yesterday. Mr. Bell is a scholar, public health physician, he even worked for the World Health Organization years ago, but saw the error of his ways and was converted to what we believe today. Here's what he said yesterday. Pressure to conform is strong. Maintaining integrity carries risks. I had people come to my office in the 1980s when I was Minister of Mines and Energy and offered me cash $1 million and an annual salary if I would just quit right now and lie on the beach for the rest of your life and be looked after. Wow. I physically kicked them out of my office. When people tell me stories, and a lot of people can say, you know, they may be true, they may not be true. I can tell you real stories of what happened to me personally. Okay. That's not the only one. I could stay here till quite late telling you other such stories, and I can verify every single one of them for you. And most people who know me know I can verify every one of those things. That's why I'm still standing here today.
Woo! Thank you, Brian.
We all have families, jobs, and lifestyles to protect. The belief of many that the humanitarian sector was somehow different should be now shattered. This is a good thing, as illusions do not help us, and we need to recognize the historical reality that preserving personal comfort has often entailed throwing others under the bus. To recognize the historical reality that preserving personal comfort has often entailed throwing other people on the bus. You know that in your own lives now. A lot of you know that you've been thrown under the bus, either by your family or by your friends or both. How about yours truly, talking about stories and verifying anything? I live up island now. My mayor turned me down from making a presentation to his council. My MLA would not allow me to make a presentation to his caucus, the government caucus right here. And number three, just in the last 2 weeks, a public school teacher who called Carol and told her, would Brian speak to the students on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms? She jumped at the chance, I jumped at the chance, and we agreed. 48 hours before the event, the teacher was called in the principal's office and said, you must cancel this speech by Mr. Peckford. 3 things in my own small city happened to me personally. That's why personal comfort and looking after one's own job, I was thrown under the bus. When the tide turns, the easiest approach is to turn with it. As a staff member of an international agency said to me recently, the money is going into the pandemic preparedness. You have to accept and go with it. And here's his final sentence, 2 sentences. As an insight into humanity, this response is a disappointing one. We are always poorly served by cowardice. We are always poorly served by cowardice. But recognizing how things are, and that help is not coming from those who are paid to do so, will strengthen the resolve of the rest of humanity to move forward without them, taking the future into their own hands. That's what we must do. I hope from what you heard from the speakers today and in the other talks we'll have in this conference tonight and all day tomorrow, that you have gained something, that why you came here was worthwhile, that you are leaving with more courage to move on into the future so that we can remake Canada based on the principles of the Magna Carta that I just helped articulate, and more that would come later. If we don't do that, we don't recognize our own faults, the own faults in our friends and our family, we don't have the courage to stand up in our own communities and speak out and amongst our own families, and then with our own political parties. We must discard a lot of what we thought was correct. My mom one time, if the doctor said, go out and jump in the lake and stay under the water for the next half an hour, she perhaps would have done it. We know now that that's not a pretty realistic thing to do. The same way with lawyers or judges or whatever, right? We must understand that if we have really progressed, that we understand where the faults lie, where the failures are, and be ready to accept a new way based upon freedom and on democracy, right? And on fairness for everybody. Because if we don't, we will go down that road that so many countries have gone down in the past and be no more the free country we thought we were. Thank you very much.
Everybody loves Brian Peckford.